Imagine discovering that the death of someone you knew hides a secret so big that it could change everything you thought about justice. But what if that secret never came to light? The coffin was closed. No one wanted to see his face. For many, it was just another understated farewell, a simple funeral with few flowers, restrained words and vacant looks. But at the back of the room, there was someone who couldn't take their eyes off the coffin. Someone who knew that this body carried a deadly secret. It wasn't just the end of a man, it was the end of a story that was never told. Or rather, that was buried with him. He wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. He was hardly liked. He was, for all intents and purposes, an ordinary citizen. But the kind of silence that surrounded his life and, most importantly, his death, screamed louder than any funeral tribute. There was something in the air, a tension that was hard to ignore, as if everyone there knew that a piece was missing, a detail that changed everything. What few knew is that behind that faded face in memories, there was a past marked by suspicions, an inconclusive investigation, and a letter that was never found. What you are about to discover may surprise you, because behind the apparent simplicity of this case lies a web of fears, omissions, and guilt. A story that seemed to have ended, but in reality never really began. Who was this man? What did he carry in his heart until the last days of his life? And why do so many people still today avoid speaking his name? The silence at that funeral was not respect, it was weight. The weight of someone who knows but never told. The weight of someone who saw but never spoke. And those present, observing, from afar with their eyes fixed on the coffin, knew that this was not just a funeral. It was the final punctuation mark on something that no one had the courage to write. Have you ever felt that something important was left out of a story? That the truth was there but no one wanted to look it in the face? Well, this letter, the one that is said to have been written by him before he died, is the key to everything. A supposed confession, a text that could exonerate those who were condemned in the past, but it vanished as if it had never existed. Some say that it was secretly delivered to someone. Others believe he burned it out of fear or guilt. Stay with me until the end, because this story is about what happens when silence is more dangerous than the truth, about when justice falls silent and doubt turns into a sentence. In this video, we will walk through the shadows of the human mind, traversing memories that would prefer to remain buried. We'll talk about criminal psychology, trauma, silent pacts, and the price paid for keeping the truth locked away. You may start thinking that all of this is just another theory, but as the details emerge, you might find yourself inside this story. So, prepare yourself, because from now on every word will carry the weight of everything that was never said. Every gaze, every gesture, every ignored clue could be a key to understanding why this confession never came to light, and why it perhaps should never have appeared. If up to this point this story has affected you in some way, if it made you remember something unresolved or a silence that screams inside, share it with me in the comments. Sometimes what you write can help others see their own stories as well. This space is for that, for us to exchange, reflect, and perhaps give voice to what has been silent for too long. Like this video, because every click shows YouTube that this type of content needs to reach more people. People who, like you, seek to understand the deeper layers of the human mind, pain, and what true justice means. And if you feel that you want to continue diving into these stories with me, subscribe to the channel. This helps me keep this project alive and gives meaning to every new investigation we bring to light here. Your participation is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. Now take a deep breath, because what comes next is even more disturbing. Most people who knew him would never imagine what lay behind that contained, almost faded behavior. He was the type of man who went unnoticed, gentle in speech, punctual in commitments, discreet in habits. But when we look more closely, we start to notice the details that escape at first glance. The gaze that avoids direct contact, the tone of voice that changes when mentioning certain names, the subtle discomfort in response to innocent questions. Signs that alone say little, but together tell a story that no one wanted to hear. Years before his death, he had been mentioned in an investigation into a brutal crime that shocked the city, a case that still raises questions today. A young woman was murdered, and due to lack of evidence, the main suspect was acquitted. However, behind the scenes of the trial, leads emerged that pointed to him, small indications, indirect connections. People who swore they had heard something compromising. But nothing was concrete enough. A piece was missing, a direct link, a thread that could sew the rumors into a real accusation. And so, his name vanished from the records. The case was archived. Justice turned a blind eye. What is most unsettling is what happened next, because instead of moving on with ease, he became even more reclusive. He changed neighborhoods, avoided old colleagues, distanced himself from his own family. A silent transformation, almost imperceptible to those who didn't know him well. But for those paying attention, it was obvious. He was trying to erase his own traces. As if what he knew, said, or had done could be erased with time as long as no one brought it up. As if burying the past was enough to kill the guilt. That's where things start to weigh heavily, because the absence of evidence doesn't mean the absence of truth. And the truth, when hidden for too long, begins to seep into the crevices of the mind. Some call this unresolved trauma. Others, a type of emotional prison, where one's own conscience becomes the cell. Perhaps he tried to convince himself that it wasn't his fault. Or perhaps he made a pact with himself to keep the secret as long as no one else got hurt. But secrets come at a cost, and sometimes the price is one's own peace. Now I want to dive even deeper into this subject, because understanding what leads someone to silence their own story is essential to comprehend the impacts of that choice. When someone decides not to speak, they are attempting to control what will be remembered, but they also risk leaving behind something that could change everything. It's at this point in the journey that the line between protection and omission begins to fade. Comment below. There's something that was never said. Let's see who's with me in this conversation. In the days that followed his death, rumors began to gain momentum. It didn't take long for his name to resurface among whispers and suspicious glances. But this time it wasn't because of the old crime. It was because of something that, according to many, he had left behind. A letter, an alleged confession written in his own hand, kept secret until his last moments. No one knew the exact content, but everyone seemed to have a version. Some said he wrote it all in one night after an emotional collapse. Others swore he handed the letter to someone he trusted with the promise that it would only be revealed after his death. The strangest part was the number of people who claimed to have seen this letter, or at least heard detailed stories about it. It was as if its existence had spread in almost mythical fashion, heavy with expectation and tension. But when they searched, nothing. No paper, no envelope, no trace. The alleged confession simply evaporated. And that's when the questions that really matter begin. Did the letter even exist? Or was it a construct created by those who needed to believe there was more to this story than silence? And if it did exist, why did it disappear? Maybe it was destroyed by him, a final act of self-preservation, of fear, or even of desperation. After all, putting on paper what one has tried to forget their entire life is more than just a gesture. It is a direct confrontation with one's own hidden truth. It is admitting, in no uncertain terms, that what has been kept guarded no longer fits in the body, and that can be unbearable. Now, if he truly entrusted that paper to someone, what would have motivated that person to keep everything hidden? Protection, shame, or complicity? The mystery of the letter becomes even denser when we understand the type of impact it could have caused. A single piece of paper may not seem like much, but when laden with revelations, decisions, and postponed truths, it can become an emotional bomb. This is the most delicate part of the journey. The notion that often those who know the truth choose silence, not out of malice, but because they don't feel ready to deal with the consequences. And that is profoundly human. The transformation that this letter could provoke was not only legal, it was also psychological. Because we're not just talking about a confession, we are talking about a final plea for forgiveness, a desperate attempt to ease one's own conscience. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because there is a detail that few people notice, but which can completely change how we interpret all of this. A discreet, almost imperceptible clue that has gone unnoticed for years, but which could reveal the true fate of that confession. Write in the comments, "Someone knows more than they say." I want to know who's really connected to this story. For a long time, his silence was seen as a choice. But what if it wasn't? Because not all silence is freedom. Sometimes it's a prison. A prison built with subtle threats, with looks that say more than words, with secrets shared behind closed. Doors are never repeated. It starts with a warning, a fear embedded in the chest, and ends with an entire life molded to avoid a single topic. And when we start to piece it together, we realize that maybe he wasn't silent by choice, but by survival. Some people close to him mentioned that he avoided specific places, declined invitations to certain gatherings, changed the subject abruptly when the past was brought up. It didn't seem like mere guilt. It seemed like fear. Fear from someone who has seen what happens to those who speak too much. And this opens a dangerous door, the possibility that this silence was in fact bought, not with money, but with psychological pressure, with empty promises, with memories that still hurt too much to be revisited. We tend to imagine that only those who want to speak do so. But what no one teaches is that trauma, when deep, can cut off speech even before the mouth opens. On the other hand, there is a type of pact that doesn't need to be signed. Sometimes it's enough to have a secret shared between 2 or 3 people. A decision made in the heat of fear, and the weight of that silence becomes collective. They pact without words but full of consequences, and perhaps he carried that burden to avoid exposing someone, or because he felt responsible for something he didn't commit, but witnessed. The human brain is complex, and when entangled in extreme situations, it can construct narratives to protect those nearby. This doesn't make the truth less real, just harder to access. There is also the possibility that deep down he wanted to speak, but never could. Emotional blockages are real and can drag on for decades. The mind goes into defense mode, and the memory recalibrates itself to keep certain parts buried. Confession, when it exists, doesn't come out like in the movies. Sometimes it comes in fragments, in disjointed phrases, in desperate looks. And when it finds no listening ear, it disappears. The emotional journey of someone carrying a hidden truth is marked by internal conflicts, poorly digested guilt, and decisions made with a heart that is shattered. Now I want to dive even deeper into this subject, because the more we understand about the backstage of silence, the more we realize it is just the tip of something much larger, something that involves tough choices, impacts that last whole lives, and an invisible transformation of those who have lived trapped within themselves for years. Comment below. Not all silence is a choice. I want to know who is feeling the weight of this story along with me. While he chose or was forced to keep quiet, someone on the other side was paying the price for this silence. A young man with his whole life ahead of him, with no criminal record, with no history of violence, but with a cruel stroke of bad luck, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was arrested based on flimsy evidence, a detail that could be interpreted in 1,000 different ways, but in that context, under the pressure of the media and the thirst for justice, it was enough to condemn him. The court wanted a culprit. Society demanded answers, and Heat was the easiest choice. The trial was marked by gaps, confusing testimonies, conflicting versions, and a defense that, no matter how hard it tried, could not compete with the narrative built by the prosecution. The absence of an official confession left room for assumptions. And when the truth does not appear, what's left is the need to point at a name. The most painful part is that amidst all of this, there was a letter that could have changed everything. A piece of paper, a sentence, a signature. But it never came to light. It never appeared. And the silence of the one who knew transformed into the sentence of the one who knew nothing. The family of the convicted young man never came to terms with it. The mother would repeat with a trembling voice that her son was innocent. That he had a good heart, that he helped the neighbors, that he would never hurt anyone. But in the end, what weighed was not his character, It was the absence of someone who should have spoken, an absence that hurt more than the imprisonment itself. Because it wasn't just freedom that was being torn away. It was identity, confidence in the system, hope. The impact of an unjust conviction doesn't stop at a cell. It spreads, devastates, transforms. And then we begin to understand the depth of this plot. The missing letter ceased to be just a lost document. It became a symbol of a choice, conscious or not, to prioritize one's own fear at the expense of another's life. And this compels us to reflect on the decisions we make when confronted with painful truths. Sometimes it's not just about what we know, it's about what we choose to do with what we know, and in that choice, lives can be saved or destroyed. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when justice relies on what is missing and not on what exists, the chance of error is even greater. And in this case, what was missing was courage, empathy, and a single sheet of paper that could have rewritten everything. Comment below, this should never have happened. I want to know who felt that twist in their skin, even without having truly lived it. In his last years, he sought professional help. He didn't speak exactly of the past, but he talked about symptoms, chronic insomnia, recurring nightmares, panic episodes, and a constant fear that he couldn't even explain. It was as if he lived on the edge of something about to collapse, but lacked the courage to look directly at it. The psychologist who accompanied him for over a year reported clear signs of guilt, an emotional weight that went beyond the common issues of everyday life. Everything about him seemed to scream for relief, but his speech was always blocked. What appeared in most sessions was an attempt to circumvent the pain without naming its origin. There were moments when he got lost in his own thoughts. He would stare intently at the ground, look away when confronted with direct questions, and return to discussing trivial matters as if he needed to escape his own mind. He used silence as both defense and language, because even without speaking, his body revealed it. His hands would sweat, his shoulders would slouch, his breath would become shallow. This isn't uncommon when someone carries a secret for too long. Silence begins to seep into every gesture, as if the truth wants to escape through other avenues, without permission. In some sessions, he would let slip disconnected phrases. He spoke of wrong decisions, of nights he preferred to forget, of people who were still paying for something they didn't owe. But he never mentioned names. He never connected the dots. It was as if the fear of turning thoughts into words was greater than the need to free himself. And this is one of the greatest dilemmas in clinical psychology, knowing that the patient is leading you to the door of the truth, but being unable to open that door alongside them. The psychologist, despite being experienced, confessed that he had never encountered a case like this. It was like walking through a labyrinth where every exit led back to the starting point. This shows how skillful the human mind can be at hiding what hurts. There is a very fine line between protection and repression. And when one lives for so long denying a truth, it ceases to be just a fact and transforms into an internal structure, an invisible part of one's identity. Breaking free from this requires much more than courage. It demands a complete transformation of mindset, an emotional surrender that few can achieve on their own. And perhaps he knew this. Perhaps he was waiting for someone to notice, decipher, interpret the signs without him needing to verbalize them. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is one last session that may contain forgotten details, sidelined notes, clues that were never taken seriously, but that, when viewed in a new light, can reveal more than one imagines. Comment below. The body speaks what the mouth silences. I want to know who is picking up every layer of this story. Days before his death, something changed in his behavior. The records from the sessions, reports from neighbors, and even a note found in a forgotten drawer indicate that he was about to make an important decision. He had scheduled a meeting. It is unclear with whom. Some believe it was an investigative journalist who had worked on similar cases. Others say he sought a priest known for keeping secrets in confession. The fact is, he was going to tell, or at least try, for the first time in years. He seemed ready to open up about what he had kept for so long. On the eve of the meeting, he was seen walking alone at night with an envelope in hand. According to a neighbor, he appeared nervous, hesitant, like someone rehearsing a step without knowing if the ground will hold. He didn't say where he was going, nor did he leave clear clues, but upon returning, something about him seemed different. It wasn't relief, it was exhaustion, as if he had fought an internal war and lost. The envelope was never found. And the meeting, it never happened. The person waiting for him received no call, no cancellation, just silence. A silence that stretched until the last breath. This episode carries the weight of an unfulfilled turning point, because he came very close to the truth, very close to provoking a rupture with his own past. Perhaps he wrote the letter. Perhaps he held it in his hands, folded it carefully, read it once, twice, 10 times, but something made him pull back. Fear of consequences, protection of someone, or simply the shock of facing black and white what has been tried to forget for so long. The mind, when confronted with the truth it hides, often freezes, and that night, what prevailed was the impulse not to move forward. What is most intriguing is that this episode is not documented in any official report. It was reconstructed through fragments from people who did not understand the significance of what they were witnessing. And it is often in this way that many stories are lost, in the background, in the details that were not noted, in the words that lingered in the air, in the silent decisions that went unnoticed. The journey he began there and did not finish shows how we are always just a step away from altering the course of our own story. But that step, however simple it may seem, requires a strength that we do not always manage to access. Now I want to dive even deeper into this subject, because there is a sequence of events in the following days that may hide decisive revelations, ignored signs, unusual reactions, and the behavior of someone who may have been more involved than they appeared. Comment below. He almost had the courage. I want to see who feels this weight with me. After his death, what stood out was not the family's mourning. It was his absence. There were no speeches, no tributes, not even that moment when someone tries to remember the qualities of the deceased. The atmosphere was strange, as if everyone felt more relieved than moved. A heavy silence permeated the wake. And it wasn't just within those walls. It had come from before. The entire family seemed to have made a tacit pact. Do not speak of the past. Do not utter that name. And if someone insisted, a look was enough to end the conversation. Some of the closest relatives simply disappeared from the surroundings. They changed cities, exchanged phone numbers, even avoided social media. When journalists and onlookers tried to revisit the case, they found closed doors, short answers, ignored calls. Even neighbors who once spoke freely began to avoid interviews. This by itself says a lot. In stories like this, collective silence is almost always a symptom of something that is still alive. Not in words, but in guilt, shame, or fear. The looming question is, was this silence motivated by protection or complicity? Because protecting the memory of someone who has gone is something understandable, human. But ignoring facts, hiding documents, erasing traces, that enters another realm. In families marked by old secrets, denial becomes a survival mechanism. The past is cut, shaped, adjusted to fit the narrative that is easier to bear. And in this case, perhaps this narrative desperately needed him to be just an ordinary man, with an ordinary life, and not someone who hid a truth that could have changed everything. There are stories that are not told because they are dangerous, and others that are not told because they hurt too much, and sometimes both things intertwine. There are those who say that one of his sisters received at some point a sealed envelope, and that she was never seen in public again after that. There are those who speak of a nephew who years ago allegedly started investigating the case on his own and was advised to stop. None of this is documented, but the subtext screams. And when so many members of the same family avoid the same topic, it is a sign that there is something there that still pulses. Now I want to dive even deeper into this subject, because there is a pattern that repeats in stories like this. The closer the truth gets, the more silence tries to smother it. And understanding this can reveal a lot about what has yet to be said and about who truly had something to lose from this revelation. Comment below. There is silence that protects and silence that hides. I want to see who sees these layers with me. Over time, the so-called confession became almost a legend. Everyone seemed to have heard of it, but no one had actually seen it. His name became shrouded in a fog of mystery. It was him, but they never confirmed it. He knew something, but died silent. The letter was ready, but it disappeared. And then comes an interesting point. Did this letter really exist? Or did the collective unconscious create a more bearable version of reality amid the pain, doubt, and prolonged silence? A symbolic escape from a truth that no one wanted to face directly. The human mind has complex ways of dealing with trauma. Sometimes it reconstructs memories, erases segments, distorts details. And when what is at stake is a shared guilt or a senseless loss, the creation of myths can serve as a mechanism of self-preservation. It is as if it seems easier to believe that the truth was there, but escaped, than to accept that it never came. Because accepting the void, accepting that perhaps he died without ever wanting to talk, without ever writing anything, that forces one to confront a type of profound frustration that dismantles any expectation of late justice. There are also those who say that the story of the letter was deliberately fueled, that someone took advantage of the moment of grief to plant an alternative version, a convenient distraction. And when doubt settles in, it takes the place of certainty, and that's when manipulation occurs. It doesn't have to be an outright lie, just a well-placed suggestion, a forced memory, a loose comment at the wake. From there, the letter becomes the truth, because everyone wants to believe that the story has an explanation, even if it is never found. There is still another possibility, deeper and perhaps more uncomfortable, that the confession did exist, but not as a physical document. Perhaps he never actually wrote it. Maybe he rehearsed his whole life a way to free himself, but it never went beyond thought. And that, for many people, may have been interpreted as a sufficient sign that there was a buried truth. Because there are pains so rooted that they become part of identity, truths so hidden that over time, even those who lived through them begin to doubt if that was real, or just a delusion built in silence. Now, I want to dive even deeper into this subject, because the way the mind handles secrets and hidden memories can explain why some truths never emerge, and how this affects not just those who bear the weight, but everyone around them. Comment below. Sometimes what never existed also hurts. I want to know who is understanding this level of the story. In the end, his story is not just his own. It echoes in so many other lives where the truth never had a voice. Because when justice depends on someone's courage to speak, and that courage fails out of fear, trauma, or protection, all that remains is a void that the law cannot fill. Silence, in this case, was not merely the absence of sound. It was a choice, a defense, perhaps even punishment. And the cruelest part is that, even after death, he remains in control over what he did not say, as if the last word was silence, and not the truth. This case shows how silence can be many things at once. It can be a shield when protecting someone seems more urgent than revealing the truth. It can be a weapon when used to manipulate or avoid consequences. But it can also be a form of condemnation, because when one remains silent in the face of injustice, it allows it to continue. And every time someone chooses not to speak, no matter how legitimate the reason may seem, someone on the other side suffers the consequences. And the impact of this is not only measured in sentences or judgments, it marks mindsets, destroys relationships, and spreads through generations. The truth has a price, and sometimes that price is so high that people prefer to bury it along with their pains. But the problem is that it never really dies. It remains there, asleep in the subtext, in the glances, in the behaviors. It resides in the details that no one can explain, in the disproportionate reactions, in the memories that hurt without context. The truth can be hidden, but it never completely disappears. And silence, no matter how thick it is, always leaves traces. Traces that sooner or later, someone ends up following. Now I want to dive even deeper into this subject, because understanding how silence shapes the fate of those who keep quiet and those who are silenced can reveal much more about human nature than any judgment. And perhaps it helps us see with new eyes what has never been said. If you've made it this far, it's because this story has touched you in some way. And that to me already says a lot. This kind of content demands more than just attention. It requires listening, reflection, and empathy. So if it made sense to you, if any part of this journey echoed inside you, leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end." It's the simplest and truest way for me to know who really walked with me to the last detail. Also, take a moment to like the video. It not only helps the channel, but allows this conversation to reach more people who might need to hear exactly this. And if you want to continue exploring themes like this, with depth, respect, and a human perspective on the backstage of the Mind and Justice, subscribe to the channel. There's much more coming. There's a playlist where you can check out other stories and it's showing up for you. And there's another story about a tape burned with a big secret that you can explore. Click and continue with me over there. You can't miss this one.